Welcome back to The World Transformed. We are a socialist think tank, and we are going to be talking today about the cost of living crisis. This is the big one. This is something that I think on the left we really need to address, because the mainstream media narrative about what's causing the cost of living crisis and the solutions to the cost of living crisis simply aren't being explained very well at all. They're confusing people. To be honest, they make literally no sense because, in my view, they're trying to cover something up. They're trying to tell us a story that's different from what reality is. So today we're going to explore the reality of the cost of living crisis. I'll introduce myself. I'm Paul Daly. I'm the presenter at Socialist Think Tank. And now I'm going to pass you to my amazing guests. I'm going to start off with Sarah from the Bakers Union. Sarah, would you like to say something about yourself? Tell us who you are.
Yes, I'm Sarah Wooley. I'm the General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union. Our members work throughout the food industry, so everything from production to delivery to retail. And before I started working for the union, I worked in a shop, a big shop. So kind of at the forefront of kind of low pay, contractual hours, that part-time, and understand the cost of living crisis and the brutal reality of it, really.
So, like for me, the important thing is that you've done the job. Were you a workplace representative? Were you like a shop steward in the union? I think that's so important for a general secretary to have that background in really dealing with the day-to-day stuff. So you will really understand how people are living their lives. And also, I suppose, having worked in a shop, you get to see like all the different aspects of society and people coming through the doors and that kind of thing. Is that a fair assumption?
I certainly have.
Yeah. And also, we've got Gary. Gary, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because we're very excited to have you on also.
My name's Gary Stevenson. I'm an economist, mainly look at inequality. The big thing for me is my background. I was a trader. I worked as a trader after the 2008 crisis. I worked for Citibank, and I became Citibank's most profitable trader in the world by betting that because we wouldn't fix inequality, that crisis would last for a very long time and have a very bad impact on our economy. So I did that for a few years. I bet that the economy would never recover, and I made a lot of money doing it. And after a couple of years, you start to think maybe I should try and stop this from happening. So I quit that job, which the bank wasn't too happy about. I went and did a degree in economics at Oxford, and that was a load of posh guys in capes, working in castles. And I figured this is probably not where change is going to come from. So I quit that and I started to sort of try and speak publicly. So now I've got a YouTube called Gary's Economics, where I try and basically explain to people how serious inequality is, wealth inequality, the effect it has on the economy, the effect it has on ordinary families. The big aim of the YouTube is basically to make a space where we talk about economics in a way that is accessible and easy for just ordinary people to understand. And it's super important now because COVID has seen the biggest and fastest ever increase in inequality in the country. Obviously, the budget yesterday will see another massive increase in inequality. And it's really important that people understand how that's going to affect them. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. And from your point of view, do you think like the economy is deliberately cloudy? So they'll use words that ordinary people might zone out on, and they might not really engage with economics and think, that's actually above me. Do you think that's like a deliberate thing, or do you think that's something that's happened by accident? You mentioned like the kind of people at Oxford in capes.
Yeah, I think there's a problem, in my opinion, with the culture of economics in general, which is that it's become the norm to use this complicated phrases, complicated words, like acronyms people don't understand. I think a big problem we have with economics is that there's basically two odds of economics, which is this sort of public-facing economics, like media, journalism, central banking, like the Bank of England, and then there's the financial markets. If you go in the financial markets, everybody is just, you have to be right all the time. And you get rewarded very aggressively if you're right. But then in this public world, the incentives are such to sort of speak a good game and sort of sound smart and look smart. So if you ask me, you get these people on the news talking about economics. The reality is they are not trying to be right. They're not rewarded for being right. At the beginning of the financial crisis, I put out articles in Open Democracy, videos on my YouTube saying, after COVID, we're going to see a massive cost of living crisis. And that was right. At the same time, Larry Elliott, head economics editor of The Guardian, was saying we're going to see a house price collapse. 3 years later, where's the punishment for that? So ultimately, these guys in the media, they're not trying to be right. They're not rewarded for being right. And I think that's a big problem. That's why you get basically bad analysis, unfortunately.
That's really rings true. I think a lot of people at home will be thinking, that's exactly their experience of it. We're told all these things like as if there's some like tremendous all-seeing eye that will understand the economics of the country. At the same time, they're getting it wrong every single time, guaranteed to get it wrong every single time. So I'm going to firstly, let's come to Sarah, because we're just sorting out a couple of issues there with Gary's mic. Sarah, the cost of living crisis, what are you seeing for your members? So let's talk about like what is the reality on the ground, because I have a fear that we haven't seen the worst of it, but we are starting to see some real negative effects on people and how they live their lives. So what are you seeing? What are you getting reported to you through your membership?
So if I take you back to last year, so before we'd even kind of fully got into this cost of living crisis, we surveyed our members around their access to food through the pandemic. So our members in the main worked throughout the whole of the pandemic, producing food, selling food. When we got the results back from the survey, 40% of them were eating enough because they didn't have enough food to eat. 1 in 5 actually ran out of food between paydays. 35% were eating less so the kids could have enough to eat. We've got 7.5% that had become fully reliant on food banks, and 1 in 5 were using friends and family to support them, to provide them food so they could feed themselves and the families. That was before, the cost of petrol rocketed, the energy prices went up. If we ran that now, I know that those figures would be double what they were back then, and we'd have more respondents, and it's just catastrophic. We've got members that are telling us that they're doing extra shifts at McDonald's just so they can have a free meal whilst they're there, because otherwise they wouldn't be eating at all. We've got members that, have anonymously told us that they're actually pinching food from work so that they can go home and try and create something. That's now. We're still in kind of the... my dad never used to let us put the eating on until the end of October. He was quite tight being a Yorkshireman. But people haven't had to put their eating on, have they, because we've been in such warm weather. Our concern is when we get to a point where people are thinking, right, I need to rank up the heating now, the bills are going to fly up. What's going to happen? We know there are millions of children in poverty that have got working parents. And the reality for many of our members is they don't know how they're going to afford to get to work, to do work, to then pay the bills that they need to pay. And it's heartbreaking because these are people, like I say, that were working through the pandemic, celebrated as key workers, but aren't paid enough to be able to feed themselves and the families.
Yeah, we had a big thing, like our local MP in Sedgefield was, he was saying about how much he supported key workers, and he was out clapping on his doorstep and making a big deal of it. But at the same time, he was voting through legislation that meant that people who were earned under a certain amount of money were considered to be low-skilled workers. Well, which is it? Is it key workers or is it low-skilled? Like these things, a lot of the time, it doesn't mean low-skilled at all. They defined it by low pay. Mm-hmm. I think all jobs out there have an element of skill about them. You can think about any job that's going. I've done all sorts of different jobs. I've been a cleaner at one point in my life. I'll tell you what, I didn't have the skills necessary for that. It was really, really hard. I was not very good at it. But I tried my best.
I'd love to see some of these MPs like make 64 sandwiches an hour at Greg's, or put cherries on the top of a Bakewell tart. They just wouldn't be able to do it. That's deemed as a low-skilled job. Yeah. But it isn't. Otherwise, everybody would be able to do it.
Absolutely agree. And along with this, so all those things that you've heard there, Gary, we've been told that this is because of what's going on in Ukraine. Yeah. And this is because global gas prices have gone up and things like that. I think people are ready now because people understand that that's a lie. Mm-hmm. People understand that this was happening before any conflict in Ukraine. This was happening anyway. I think people are ready for the truth on this one. Yeah. Now, you said you predicted this was going to happen. So, firstly, how did you predict it? And what do you think the cause is of this? Like, does that fit in with what you predicted?
Okay. I want to get the most important thing straight out of the door. Because this crisis is often spoken about in the media like it's caused entirely by the war in Ukraine. basically as if it's caused entirely by external events, almost like a natural disaster. If it was a natural disaster, everybody would be taking some sort of pain. The last 3 years have seen the biggest and fastest ever increase in millionaire and billionaire wealth in the history of this country. That's just a cold fact. If you look at just the top 250 richest individuals in the country, they made £106 billion increase in their wealth in the first 1 year of COVID. So the entire cost of the energy package is less than £100 billion. So we could pay for that if we just taxed the top 250 people enough to make them as rich as they were before COVID happened. If you broaden that, if you were to tax the entire wealthy class enough to make them as rich as they were before COVID started, you could give every single adult in the entire country £13,000. And this crisis would be over at the drop of a hat. This is what drives me insane about what's happening here. Politicians sit on the sofas of BBC Breakfast and they talk about it like it's so terrible what's happened, right? If you were to tax the rich enough to make them as rich as they were 3 years ago, you could give every adult in the country £13,000. So the people watching, what could you do with £13,000? This is not even every household, every adult. What drives me so crazy about this crisis is how fixable and unnecessary it is. It does not need to happen. This is not a natural disaster. This is a crisis of inequality. Listen, if you have a disaster like COVID, and in that disaster, you allow the biggest and fastest ever increase in inequality to happen in your country, you cannot be surprised when it is immediately followed by the biggest and fastest ever decrease in living standards for ordinary families, because that is what inequality means. You have made the rich richer, and you have made ordinary families significantly poorer. Imagine if the government came out and taxed every single adult in the country £12,000 and gave it to the rich. People would be up in arms. But that is what has happened. And the reason I was able to predict this is because at the very beginning of COVID, you could see this happening. You knew straight away that things like furlough, and I'm not against furlough in any way, you could see straight away it was unbelievably expensive. So you have to ask 2 questions. Where's the money coming from and where's it ending up? Nobody asked that. Nobody asked that, okay? If the money's not coming from the rich, then it's coming from the taxpayer. Okay, and where's the money ending up? Okay, if you did not end up £12,000 richer, somebody has your money. And you could see from the beginning of COVID, because during COVID, ordinary families' expenses did not decrease significantly. Most ordinary families, 70, 80, 90% of their expenses, rent, mortgage, food, bills. And those expenses did not disappear. But if you look at very rich families, most of their spending is luxuries, expensive holidays, expensive restaurants, expensive bars, going to the theatre, right? All of that stuff stops. So during COVID, the spending of very rich families collapses 70, 80%. But a lot of that spending pays the bills of ordinary families who work in those sectors. So what you see during COVID is the rich stop spending and ordinary families stop receiving their incomes. Okay, so the government steps in, prints the money, gives it to ordinary families. Ordinary families use it to pay their bills. The owners of the assets are the rich, and they're not spending. So in the end, £600 billion from the government to the rich. That was predictable from the start of COVID. So that's £12,000 per adult. If that all goes to top 10%, you're talking about every single adult in the top 10% making 100, 200 grand pure cash. So I'm asking you, imagine the government gave 100, 200 grand to every rich person in the country. Of course you're going to see an inflationary crisis. How much money is 100, 200 grand for every single rich person in the country? This was so predictable in advance, so painfully predictable. If the government is going to give out £600 billion, somebody has to do the analysis of where does that money end up, who benefits, who gets richer, and nobody did it. Nobody in the media did it, nobody in the Labour Party did it, nobody in the Bank of England did it. Nobody did it. It's criminal. And then after that enormous increase in wealth of the rich, you could tax it back and you could solve this crisis. What do? They slash taxes on rich people. I cannot believe what's happening. And you know, as somebody who has personally made millions of pounds betting that if you smash inequality through the roof, you destroy the economy and destroy living standards for ordinary people. I know I'm not the person who's going to get hurt by this, but I know what's going to happen down the line, and it's going to be. You know, I run a YouTube channel talking about this stuff, and when I saw what happened yesterday, I was thinking, is it even right for me to make a video about this? Because maybe it's better that people don't know. Because I cannot describe to you how bad this is going to be. You know, I hear you talking about this, and I wish I could tell you that was temporary and it's going to get better. But if you look at the policies, this is going to get significantly worse. And this is me. I'm not, I'm a wealthy person. I'm not the one who's going to get hurt by this. And it's difficult for me to think about what's happening. So it was predictable because you could see from the beginning of COVID, we were going to see a massive increase in inequality. And I think people need to understand, giving a ton of money to rich people hurts you as an ordinary family because it makes you poor relative to them. They get more resources, you get less resources. That's what we're seeing. And it's so important people understand that, because if people don't understand that, then the government can do what they're doing and what we saw yesterday. And it's heartbreaking, and it hurts me to hear these stories.
Yeah, that's a pretty bleak picture, to be honest, that you've just painted there. It's, for me, the economy's broken. If that money is going straight to rich people, so they pump the money in at the bottom, if the economy is pumping that wealth straight to the top, this trickle up system's not even trickle up, it's rush up, isn't it? It's like it's getting pumped up at an absolutely exorbitant rate all the time. That's a broken economy. And broken economies need to be fixed with taxes. You need to be taxing money out from the wealthy people, from the wealthiest, to give it to everyone else, because the economy's broken. Personally, I'd rather see that wealth circulated within a community. But the economy's so broken because we've got so many massive corporations, small businesses going by the wayside. Like in my area, there are so many small businesses folding at the moment. And people say, the Conservatives are the party of business, but they're not the party of small business. They're the party of massive, massive companies and massive CEOs. You'll know a thing or two about CEOs, won't you, Sarah? How are the CEOs doing? Because I know, I'm going to come on to that weird economic car crash that was the budget yesterday. I'm going to come on to that shortly, but shall we just check? Are the CEOs okay in the industry? Do you think they're going to be okay after all this? Yeah, because they must have been, from that budget yesterday, they must be the ones in bother, but are they all right?
I would imagine so, yeah. I would imagine so. Although, if we could get some of our members and communities standing up and demanding better, maybe there won't be, I think we should to have a bit of a France element where people are out on the streets, and the country stops. And I know we're probably a long way from that, but I'm kind of wondering what it's going to take for people to do that. People talk about a general strike, but I think we need more than that, don't we? We need people out on the streets saying we're not happy and we're not having any more. Absolutely. We want a new government because nobody wants Liz Truss.
Now, you're the person to talk to about this, because I know the Bakers Union have kind of pushed back quite a bit on this, and we've seen a few victories, and you have organised. Now, one of the things that's very, very difficult, I think, to organise amongst working class people and amongst people who don't have a lot of wealth is, if they're going to take action, they've got to sacrifice a day's pay. Yeah. And a day's pay could be the difference between them eating or not eating. And that is a huge thing. If you're going to withdraw your labour, remember when the Conservative Party all went on strike over Boris Johnson eventually, when they realised the writing was on the wall and they couldn't be associated with his awful behaviour anymore, and they tried to rebrand themselves again. They were able to go on strike. They were able to withdraw their labour from him because there was no consequence. They were still getting their MP salary and things like that. It's so easy to do it if you don't have anything to risk. And we've got, I can't go through this without mentioning we've got Heather Wood sitting over there, legend of the miners' strikes, who kept people going during the miners' strikes in the 1980s, which is absolutely brilliant to see. So, how do you get people to take those risks? How do you support them in doing that? That must be a massive challenge for you in the Bakers Union.
It is. I mean, we're quite a small union in comparison to some of the larger unions out there. But I think nobody chooses to take strike action lightly. You're right. It's a lost day's worth of pay. But I think you can see with the rising number of people that are choosing to take strike action just how pissed off people are. I wasn't sure whether I could swear then.
You can swear.
I stopped for a second. But you can just see how pissed off people are and how they're just angry that they're the people that have kept us going, yet the bosses that have stopped at home, been safe through a global pandemic, are getting richer and they're still struggling to make ends meet. And I suppose it comes to a tipping point, doesn't it? You carry on as you are struggling, or you lose a day's pay and maybe get something better at the end of it, or you lose multiple days' pay and get something better. And I think as trade unions, we all try and support our members. You know, we make sure there's food on the picket lines. We're not all in positions where we can support our members financially, but we do everything that we can to make sure that that picket line, they're not being starved back into work. And I think we're going to see more of that in the coming months. More workers are going to come together, you know. But we're only 6 million people, and I say that we're only 6 million people. There are 18 million workers in the UK that are in trade unions, that are organising their workplaces. And if I can, I'll just do a little plug, because we're launching Organise Now today at 3:15, and that is designed to support these 18 million people that have got no idea what a trade union is, no idea where to start organising their workplace, make that first step. Because nobody else is going to do it for us. The Tories are. They're not bothered. They just want to make their rich friends richer. I can say this as a General Secretary of a disaffiliated trade union, but the Labour Party leadership aren't going to do anything for us either. Workers and communities are going to have to come together. We're going to have to stand together, and we're going to have to organise and demand better, because that's the only way that we're going to make change.
Oh, well done.
Thanks, man.
Now, I'm going to move on to that little budget yesterday. It was a mini budget or something like that. I know that because he wasn't allowed to get drunk while he did it, apparently, because it wasn't a proper budget. But you're allowed to get drunk if you are doing a budget. One of these wonderful quirks we have in our ridiculous parliamentary system at times. So that came in yesterday. Now, that was straight out of trickle down. They aren't pretending anymore. One of the things that I would have loved to have seen in the mainstream media is a commentary that austerity was a lie. So we've been told for years and years that deficits are these awful things, and you can never ever run a deficit and you've got to pay it back, which is, I think, economic nonsense, because without deficits then you don't have any money at all. You know, like government spending is public sector wealth, but it's where that money ends up that's important. They have made a conscious choice, haven't they, to say, right, we are going to put money into the pockets of the richest people. They're the ones who are struggling. Whether or not they believe that that wealth will genuinely trickle down, that has proved that austerity was a lie. Austerity was done for no reason. It was something that was done to us to break down working class people, to keep people in their place, and to make people's lives worse, to reduce the state, to reduce services, because they don't believe in services for people. Is that a fair analysis, or, you know, have I entirely got it wrong? Because what I saw was like tax cuts for rich people. There were a few things in there, like I would have reversed the national insurance rise, to be honest, because that does affect people badly, although wealthier people benefited more from the reduction in that rise anyway. Like, have I got that wrong? Because I'm talking to an economist about economics here. So I'm starting to think maybe I'd better shut up. So what do you think, Gary?
First of all, I encourage people to talk about economics as much as they can, because I hate this space where ordinary people feel like they're not allowed to speak about it, because ultimately, I studied economics at Oxford, right? It's a bunch of rich people there talking about things that are going to affect your lives. So let me know your opinions, because ultimately it's ordinary people who are on the front line of this and who get hurt. For me, what it shows is the Conservative Party kind of pretended to be ideological about austerity. But if you actually look at their behaviours, what they appear to be ideological about is increasing inequality. Because they were anti-austerity, they were anti-deficit when a deficit meant a welfare state. When a deficit meant a well-funded education system, a well-funded NHS, well-funded local councils. Then they were anti-deficits. When deficits meant money to communities, to people, to services, they were anti-deficit. But when a deficit means tax cuts for the rich, tax cuts for bankers, then suddenly they're pro-deficit. So I think, and if you look at what's happened to inequality in the last 15, 20 years, you know, the Conservative Party are happy to move this way and that, but they are consistently, massively increasing inequality. And, you know, I would encourage the Labour Party and people on the left to come back and fight that by having an understanding of the importance of wealth and wealth distribution and who has it. Because whilst we argue about whether a deficit is acceptable or not, we're losing our houses, we're losing our NHS, we're losing our assets. You know, I'm getting older now, but people of my generation and younger, who can afford a house now? I tell you the people who can afford that, because look, interest rates went up 0.5% yesterday. Well, some people don't need a mortgage because they've got cash. I've already told you the average rich person accumulated 100 to 200 grand cash in the last 3 years. So now we're in a situation where if you've got cash, which a lot of rich people do, you can buy a house. If you're from an ordinary family, you want to buy a house with a mortgage from your work, you can't. So I think we need to wake up and realize, listen, wealth is important, assets are important, and we're losing it, and they are getting it. So, you know, if we had that awareness, then in the last 3 years, we would have been saying, oh my God, how much is the wealth of the rich increasing in the last 3 years? How is that going to affect us? Ultimately, if the government gives cash to rich people, like it has done in the last 3 years, and now it's going to do again, you know, cash is not like resources. It's not like real assets. Cash is what we use to distribute who gets resources. So the big problem here is when they cut taxes, ordinary families receive a small cut in their taxes. So maybe you're getting an extra 20, 30 pounds a week, and you're like, happy days, I'm getting an extra 30 pounds a week. Whereas the rich guy down the road from you is getting an extra 500 pounds a week. You think you're richer, but ultimately, money is how we distribute resources. So if you get a tiny bit of cash, and the rich get loads of cash, you have more money, but you will get less resources, less housing, less food, less assets. So don't allow yourself to be blinded by a government which is happy to give you pennies while it's giving the rich pounds, because that will give you more money and less resources. And nothing could make that clearer than what's happened in the last 3 years. The government gave a lot of money out, right? And, you know, the average amount accumulated was £12,000, right? So an ordinary family, you know, that is not rich might have got £3,000, £4,000. £4,000 is a lot of money, so you're thinking you're winning. But the rich got 200 grand, and then house prices double, and the food price goes up 50%, and the energy price doubles, and you're suddenly thinking, I thought I was richer, but actually I'm poorer. We need to be smarter here. We need to look at who has the wealth, who has the assets, and don't allow ourselves to be blinded by gifts of pennies from a government that is actually robbing us blind.
Excellent. From that, I keep on thinking as well that like once you've got money becomes like, money's expensive for poor people, and it gives rich people money. So if once rich people have a load of cash, they can invest that or whatever they call it, they can speculate, do all those things, and that money will then return more money to them. If you don't have much money, then you know your money's expensive to get. The less money you have, the more expensive a loan is. You know, that kind of thing really causes problems. Or you're on a meter for your gas. Like I know that's maybe a bigger issue at the moment because the direct debits have gone absolutely, crazy as well.
Can I make a big point on this quickly?
Yeah, of course.
Because the government has slashed taxes for rich people so much, financial markets have massively increased interest rates in response because they think it's going to be inflation and interest rates are going to go up. Okay, so when the government slashed taxes for rich people, the rich get richer. When interest rates go up, it's easy to think that hurts everybody, but it doesn't. When interest rates go up, it hurts people who have debts, and it benefits people who have money, okay? And who has debts? That's ordinary families with mortgages, and it's the government who has debt, okay? But we know that the average rich individual has increased their cash by 100 to 200,000 pounds in the last few years. So they are going to make a ton of money off of this. So the government, in giving money to rich people, has pushed the interest rates up, which means that ordinary families will pay more money every single month to rich people. It's a disaster. It's a disaster policy. Every single thing that's happening is more money out of the pocket of ordinary families, ordinary workers, ordinary people, and into the pocket of the rich and the super rich, who, I will add again, have never increased their wealth more quickly than they have in the last 3 years.
Can I just touch on something? I tried not to watch it yesterday. It's been a long enough week as it is. But there were two things that stood out. One, not necessarily cost of living crisis related, which was this new legislative bill that's going to make sure that an employer can put in a crap pay offer and then trade unions have got to ballot it. That we know that that's just an attack on kind of the RMT and the CWU and Unite because of the last few months and the strikes that have been happening. But the other thing that came out was about universal credit claimants have got to apply for more and better paid jobs or they'll get penalised. I might have read that wrong, but that was kind of the gist of what I've got. I mean, how disgusting is that? Not only are people being pushed further into poverty because they've got to wait longer to get the benefits that they need to survive, that aren't enough anyway, but they're going to be penalised if they don't get a better paid job. But actually, most jobs these days that are easy to get are minimum wage. So they're going to be penalised for getting a minimum wage job that they're going to lose out on the benefits anyway. But some guy that's, earning £80,000 a year just from being an MP has decided that they're not working hard enough. So they need it. that's why I didn't watch it all yesterday, because I would have sat here and ranted.
People earning more than 150
Exactly.
grand as well.
So the people that aren't going out and worrying about how they're feeding the family, or, you know, are just with the fancy yachts and the big houses, are getting even more money. And the people that are literally scraping by have got to do more. It just...
The big question I have, because it was a difficult day for me yesterday, and I know I'm not the person who's going to be affected by it, right? But are people going to accept this? How?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I really... Do they think they're going to get away with it? And, you know, I hope people won't. I hope people won't. But a friend of mine called me up and he said the same thing. He's like, well, if I'm going to get £20, £30 a week, maybe my mate's going to be happy about that. And this is what we need to... This is why we need to educate and let people understand.
So kind of like battered down, aren't they? You know, 12 years of austerity, the pandemic that we've just been through. People have lost loved ones whilst they've been partying.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, and this is why I'm talking about organising and stuff, because they don't know what to do. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. You know, things have been shit for a long time. And it's up to kind of us to say, look, there is better.
Yeah.
But we've got to come together. You've got to dig deep, and we've got to kind of build the trenches, so to speak, because driving this morning here, and I dropped my partner off in town, and we saw a homeless guy on the street, and he went, do you know what, in the next few months we're going to see more of that, aren't we? And we are, because you're right, there's no end to this, but we've got to do stuff.
For me, it's about telling stories, and the problem is, for years and years and years, we've been told a story that individualism is good, that people deserve what they get, people who work hard are rewarded, people who don't work hard are the people who end up on the street, and that is not reality. Yeah. Like, neoliberalism is the ideology that hates itself. You know, it says that, you know, within the neoliberal ideology, they talk about the natural rate of unemployment, don't they? They need an unemployed body of people in order to ensure that the wages of ordinary people are kept down, so that they can say, right, we can go on, and like an unemployed person will come and get your job. And yet they hate unemployed people. Now, I would argue that unemployed people are in the public sector. They're paid to be unemployed to keep wages down. You know, that's the whole point of them. That's their ideology, but they won't admit it. And then they go after unemployed people and say, actually, you're doing something wrong. And people internalize that and they believe that. And everyone, like, they're looking around, they're looking at their next door neighbour or something like that, saying, oh, do you think he's got a couple more quid than me? Or I'm working harder than him and I deserve more. Rather than looking at the top of the hill at the castle, you know, the metaphorical castle of like these people with super yachts, that, you know, they are the people who are taking the wealth from our society, taking the money, taking that £12,000 out of the pockets of every single person in the country. And I think the stories that you've both told today, I think they're incredibly important that they go out to a mainstream audience. How do we get them out to a mainstream audience? Because you know what? Today it's going to be absolutely brilliant. I'm going to be speaking to people who believe what I believe. I'm here with comrades today. But there are people out there who won't be getting this message. How do we get to those? How do we change those stories, do you think? Sarah, I'm going to come to you because you speak to these ordinary people all the time in your job. We've got to talk to everybody, haven't we? I was at South Yorkshire Festival a few weeks ago, and I said two things. One of the things was, Truss will get in, and it'll be worse than we've ever seen before. She'll make Thatcher look like a Lib Dem because she's got a purpose. She's got to make up for Boris's failings, and she's going to whip the ground, and a misrunning because she did. And the second thing was that we've got to talk to people. We've got to get back into the habit of talking to people, anybody and everybody, about the realities of life, not what's being told on the right-wing media, because if you're told something often enough for long enough, you believe it, don't you? And that's what we've had in this country, the right-wing media that's friends of the billionaires telling us that your next door neighbour that don't go to work's a shirker, and the Polish couple across the road are immigrants stealing your jobs. And that's what people believe. And we've got to go out and spread the narrative that that's not right. We're all in this together. They're not. Not everybody's going to agree with us. And some conversations will be bloody difficult because they'll be right-wing. You know, they'll be Farage supporters and worse. But there will be the most meaningful conversations, because if we can get them to understand, then we will start to see change. But until we start going outside of our own echo chambers and talking to other people and engaging in those conversations, nothing's going to change, because we'll just keep talking to each other.
Yeah. I think we can use this space of individualism, right? I know it's used against us, but look, it is becoming clearer and clearer and clearer that what is happening is not working for the vast majority of individuals. This is, for a long time it was people towards the poor end of the spectrum who are getting hurt. That's not true anymore. Look at what is happening now. If you are bang in the middle, exactly average financial situation, you are getting hit here. You are getting seriously hit. And, I always think about, who are the people who are supporting the Conservative Party, and a lot of the voters are older people, and a lot of older people, especially property owning older people, are to some degree protected by their house prices going up. I want to find ways to reach out to those people and say, listen, okay, I know you're protected by house price going up. Where are your kids going to live? What are your kids' lives going to be like? What are your grandkids' lives going to be like? You know what I mean? I think we need to find, the fact is, this is not working. And it's madness. And if we live in a society where people are thinking, me and my family, well, then we should win. Because me and my family is being destroyed financially for 70-80% of the country here. So let's find ways to reach those people and communicate them and say, listen, this isn't working for me. This isn't working for you. Maybe we don't agree on absolutely everything, but we should have a big majority of the country here who should say, look, it's obvious. 70-80% of the country are being driven down. House ownership is collapsing. Levels of debt are rising through the roof. And at the same time, the fastest ever increase in wealth of the super rich. There is a massive opportunity here to build a coalition based purely on people whose financial lives are being smashed. You know what I mean? I think we need to find ways to reach those people. And, I'm going to use the opportunity to plug my YouTube channel. The idea there is that everyone is allowed in. Everyone is allowed in. And all it is about explaining that to people. Look, you're being hit. I'm being hit. And, the media is going to try and find ways to divide us. Old versus young, men versus women, different ethnicities, North versus the South, okay? And look, everybody's problems need to be recognised. But we also need to recognise that we're all getting hit. So we need to be able to come together above that and look at the speed with which people's economic lives are being hurt. So I think there's a massive opportunity here if we can build in community and building those relationships, speak to the people around you and say, look, we're all getting hit here. I know we don't agree on everything, but this is serious. And you are going to see a massive acceleration, decrease in living standards. So we take the opportunity to bring people together and say, look, we really need to create some unity, fight back, and find spaces and ways to do it.
Brilliant. And I hope people at home are clipping this and are going to put out little clips of this and share this with people, because that's a nice way to do it as well. We've just had some great explainers here from you as panelists about what the problems are, what the solutions are is going to come next. So we've got a few minutes left to talk about what those solutions are. So, I guess, Sarah, what would you like to see coming in the next, from the next government, from the Labour Party at the moment? What sort of offer are you seeing? Because at the moment, they've been very, very tentative about whether they'd even oppose that cut in the 45% rate of tax. They've been very coy about that. And I think that's an easy one for me. Yes, of course we oppose that, and I go a lot further with a lot more wealth. But what would you like to see from the next Parliament?
So we've got some clear demands from the next Parliament. We want to see the minimum wage raised to £15 an hour for all workers, regardless of age. You don't get a discount on nappies if you're a mum at 17 because you're 17. You shouldn't have a discount on your wage when you're doing the same job. An outright ban on 0 hours contracts. How can you even begin to look at getting a mortgage or rent or even a bloody mobile phone on a contract if you don't know what hours you're going to work from one week to the next? We want sick pay at 100% from day one. So if you are unfortunate enough to be ill, you can still afford to pay your bills, and that's less stress on you than just having to rely on less than £100 a week. What else? And a right to food for everyone. And part of that includes free school meals for all children up until the age of 18. And that might sound kind of radical, but if you've got to go to school until you're 18, because that's what the law says, they should feed you whilst you're there. And that, again, would release some disposable income, because you're being paid £15 an hour, to be able to spend in the local economy, and it would make a difference because it'd be normal people that have got that money, not the rich billionaires. Do I think it's going to happen? I think I might be thinking pie in the sky with the Labour Party, but that's what we would like to see. And we've seen over the last couple of years that money can be spent.
you know, and it should be spent on working people and our communities, and not giving billions to dodgy companies that aren't going to do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah, I always say that, you know, give money to someone who works in a shop or a builder or something like that, it's going to get spent. A nurse, a teacher, they'll spend their money. Give it to a billionaire that ends up in the Cayman Islands, you know, and that's what the government have just done. But at least they can't say to us, if they were sitting here now, they would have absolutely no leg to stand on for saying, how are you going to pay for that? Because they have just paid out of public money for a huge, huge increase in wealth of the wealthiest. Never again will we accept that argument that that, you know, how are you going to pay for this? It's absolute nonsense. Gary, what do you think? What would you like to see?
Well, I was too busy looking at the markets and the economics of yesterday to really see the Labour response. If they're not opposing that they're cutting the 45% rate, I'm very disappointed to hear that. But if they're not going to do it, we have to do it, and we have to explain to people how this is going to affect them. We have to explain. We have to make it as clear as possible. Clear explanations that reach people. Look, if you allow the rich to get richer, if you allow inequality to increase at a massive rate, that hurts you, your family, your kids' ability to buy houses, your ability to put food on the table, your ability to heat your home. You are in a competition for resources with the very rich. And if we give a ton of money to them and a bit of money to you, you will get hurt. We need to explain that to people. I think that is, if people understood what the future held for them and their families economically, they would not accept it. 70, 80, 90% of this country would not accept it. So we need to find ways to explain that to them, to cross the divide. And then the Labour Party would have to move. Because if people understood the importance of inequality and of wealth inequality, the importance of wealth inequality to them and their families, they would demand of the Labour Party do something about wealth inequality, and they would have to do it. So, you know, I always ask, what can I do? You know, if I can explain to people how serious it is for their lives, their future, their family's future, that we do something about inequality, they would demand it of the politicians. And then whoever's in charge, they have to move. Because if the people insist it, then the politicians have to give it. So I say, communicate to people clearly, to your friends, to your family. You know, I always say on my YouTube, look, tell your friends, tell your families what's happening. If people understood it, they wouldn't accept it. And I think that is the way that we can build a better future.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you to both of you. So I believe that we are coming to the close of the show now. Is that right, people? Yeah? Yeah, next segment coming up very, very soon. There's a very, very special guest coming, but don't forget to keep your super chats coming in, because one of the ways that we can communicate with people is through The World Transformed, through Gary's YouTube channel. Join Gary's Economics. Join a union as well, whether that's the bakers union, whether that whatever industry that you're in, whatever profession that you're in, or if you are one of those people who are employed by the state not to work, then, you know, join Unite Community or someone like that. You know, there is a trade union for you. Also, subscribe to Socialist Think Tank and The World Transformed as well. And make sure you get those super chats coming in, because the people at World Transformed are doing so much good and so much to educate people, to help people, and, you know, they deserve a lot of support. Let's show them the solidarity. We have someone coming in who I don't even know who it is. Do we know who it is yet? Someone very, very special is coming in. So I'm going to hand you over to Dan. Thanks very much to Gary. Round of applause, please. And to Sarah. We've been Socialist Think Tank. Enjoy the rest of The World Transformed.